All right, good afternoon, everybody. If you aren't muted, please mute yourself, except for the speaker. And today we're very fortunate and lucky enough to have Lisi Krall as our speaker. She's well known in the ecological economics field, and we're very excited to have her speaking today. Her talk is extending the boundaries of methodological pluralism. And without further ado, I will hand it over to you because I suspect there'll be a lot of interaction at the end. So thank you and welcome.
Okay, thank you, John. Now, am I on there? Okay.
Yes.
Can everybody see me?
Yes.
Okay. So thanks so much for the invite. I appreciate it. And I'm going to make some comments today on methodological pluralism. But to tell you the truth, I hadn't really thought much about methodological pluralism as a focus until very recently. I haven't been involved in the discussions and the debates surrounding the issue, but my own research kind of brought me to enter this particular fray. And I'll also say that what I say here today is a work in progress, so please understand that. Let me also say before I begin that when I have kind of, I tend to go off on tangents, and so I often will write out what I'm going to say because it helps me to stay on track so I don't become, like Donald Trump or something here. So bear with me, okay? The question of methodology is really a question about how we come to understand what it is we want to understand. And in the case of the mission of ecological economics, what we want to understand is this relationship between humanity's household and Earth's household, to use the ecological economic vernacular, which I don't particularly like, but that's another issue. So ecological economics has been interested in exploring this relationship between the human economy and the Earth. And this is an expansive project. It's a many-layered onion. And I sometimes wonder whether methodological choices have prematurely limited the domain of our inquiry. So let me describe for you what I see when I look out on the landscape of economic system and the Earth right now. I see a vast, powerful, highly interdependent economic system that has an inherent tendency to grow and to create vast inequality. And it is also a system that is not stable and has periods of stagnation. More importantly, I see an economic system that is paradoxical. By that I mean it is a system that functions with its own internal logic, and that logic is somehow removed from the Earth. At the same time, it is an economic system that is clearly a system that is foundationally dependent on the Earth. It is now a system undermining many of our planetary boundaries. And so this disconnect between economy and Earth is not just an oversight on the part of some economists, though there are no lack of unearthly philosophers in the discipline of economics. It reflects a fundamental reality, okay? Ecological economics has tried to remedy this problem, this disconnect, by highlighting all the ways that the economy is connected to the Earth and has attempted to reconnect it. But it hasn't changed the reality of the paradox. This is the economic contradiction of our time, because Herman Daly was correct. You can't have an economy that seems to be unlimited in its growth on a limited planet. Put another way, you can't have an economic system that functions according to its own logic that is disconnected from the Earth when in fact it's a material system. So we humans are involved in a foundational alienation from the earth, and that alienation has taken form in this paradoxical oddity of our economic system. As a species, we reside somewhere in this liminal space between connection and disconnection. And so it's that liminal space that I came to explore in my own work. My research over the past decade, a lot of it done with John Gowdy, has led me to understand that this paradoxical economic reality goes back millennia, at least to the agricultural revolution some 10 to 12,000 years ago. Agriculture around annual grains was a major evolutionary transition for humans, where we became collectively reconfigured in relation to the earth. And while the story of the agricultural and revolution and its relationship, the relationship it sets up to the earth, is not the focus of my talk here exactly, a few words must be said because I came to a particular understanding of the human relationship to earth and the paradox through the exploration of that revolution. And that exploration required methodological choices. While with the agricultural revolution, humans became expansionary, materially interdependent, and profoundly so in a way that they hadn't been before. And a foundational duality developed between them and earth that had not been previously present. Grain agriculture was not connected to the rhythm and dynamic of the earth in the way hunting and gathering had been. It's a system that tends towards surplus for reasons endemic to grain agriculture, grain production, and the institutional fabric that forms in its wake. Grain agriculture engages what I have referred to as autocatalytic feedback loops. It's, in simple terms, agriculture begets more agriculture. It amplifies itself. In this sense, it's a self-referential system. And the economic system became disembedded from the rhythm and dynamic of the more than human world, or I should say its embeddedness was reduced to the yearly cycles of annual grains and an observance of pest and predator. More importantly, the onset of grain agriculture changed the expression of human cooperation and the collective energetics of the human species. What we see after the agricultural revolution is institutional and cultural fabric that forms around agriculture, and a lot of ecological disaster and decay over the millennia. I have called the system an economic superorganism, but we also see the forward march of this powerful new way of organizing humans in their material reproduction that ultimately lands us here with global capitalism. Capitalism is a legacy of the agricultural revolution. And I have elsewhere called capitalism a system within a system. A market system is the outgrowth of the surplus of agriculture, and it too takes on a life of its own. And I've written a book called Bitter Harvest that kind of elaborates these ideas if you have any interest in further pursuing them. But briefly, what I highlight in that book is that capitalism changes the form of surplus and expansion, but not the fact of their existence. It alters human-to-human relationships in some way, but not the fact of material interdependence and hierarchy. And it drives the wedge of duality ever deeper, but it doesn't create that duality. Now, there have been tomes written on the agricultural revolution, but let me highlight some things here that I came to understand about it that bears upon this issue of economic system formation and how we think about it. It is essential here to see the agricultural revolution in the light of economic system formation. It's not just a different way of procuring food. It's an entirely different way of organizing material life. Here, I want to also get away from seeing the agricultural revolution as the result of human ingenuity and into human intelligence being the catalyst for that revolution. I don't see it that way. And I realize I take a broad stroke of history here. One can find exceptions, but there is a dominant movement of human society, material life, in a certain direction after the agricultural revolution. So let me say a few things that highlight on methodology. First of all, I do have to acknowledge the importance of the Holocene warming and the amount of carbon in the soil that helped to start the agricultural revolution. Both of these were external factors that are important to acknowledge. But the agricultural revolution was also the result of a particular evolutionary and co-evolutionary history. That is the result of the dynamic interaction of evolved human capacities and capabilities and the possibilities, tendencies, and limitations of annual grains. By our evolutionary history, I mean specifically our evolution as a social species, and not simply the evolution of the capacity for culture, but something more fundamental and universal, our capacity and tendency for a division of labor. And that both pushed and enabled the transition and became a structural part of the economic system. The division of labor helps to form, cement, and expand the system in universal ways, particularly as it is focused around cultivation. In economic system terms, evolved sociality takes form through a division of labor. An extensive and elaborate division of labor develops around cultivation. Sociality expressed in a division of labor is universal, as indicated, for example, by the similar structure and dynamic to other social species that engage agriculture, certain species of ants and termites, for example. What I say in the book that I wrote on this matter is the following. All species that engage agriculture are changed in similar ways through the process of becoming agricultural, whether they be ants, termites, or humans. And they all come to the possibility of agriculture with the potential to be collectively altered according to the demands and dictates of the pool of the agricultural system. Thus, there is a dramatic, dialectical co-evolution between cultivars and cultivators that is universal. So a powerful system emerges out of this complex soup of evolution, co-evolution, and dialectic interaction, and a duality between humans and Earth takes form. An economic system evolves that is a thing unto itself and out of sync with the broader rhythm and dynamic of the more than human world. It's not an embedded system. It's a system of profound and extensive interdependence around cultivation and its surplus, expansionary loops, and ecological decay. Embellished with technological and institutional capabilities of humans, this becomes a formidable and dangerous system for humans as far as their relationship to Earth is concerned. It lands us here. So I see a certain determinism to the system. So the methodological choice for me is definitely in the direction of dialectics and evolutionary materialism, the complex interactions of things in the material universe where there is movement, integrity, tension, and change. I like to think I follow in the footsteps of Georgescu Roegen, who made the following statement. The most important, and this is a quote, the most important aspect of the economic process is precisely the continuous emergence of novelty, which represents qualitative change. He believed that capturing novelty and change required dialectical thinking. There was certainly novelty in the agricultural revolution. It foundationally repositioned humans in relation to Earth. In my thinking, there are processes at work that form economic systems that are not adequately captured by culture and human agency and are not directly controlled by them. Out of this complexity, a powerful system was formed that has tremendous power to dictate the evolutionary history of humans and the relationship to Earth. And despite our capacity for agency and our ability to enact policies, we have not been able to move the dial on climate change, the sixth mass extinction, nor the growth dynamic of the economy. All these presently proceed unabated. So I guess by some measure of ecological economic standards, I have committed the equivalent of two mortal sins. To acknowledge the system, that the system is formed in a complex evolutionary dance that goes beyond human intentionality and culture, and that once formed, it has a life of its own. And so there is an element of determinism to it and a limit to human agency to change it. It seems to me that ecological economics has become a discipline that abhors talk of determinism. At the same time, it is a discipline that elevates human agency as the mechanism of change. These are not simply emotional dispositions, which I actually am sympathetic to, but they appear to me to be foundational building blocks, foundational building blocks of at least some of the dominant threads of ecological economics. And so I began to look at those building blocks with a more discerning eye. And that, of course, led me to the work of Georgescu Rogan and also to the work of Herman Daly, who I've previously mentioned. Now, let me begin with a quote by Herman Daly on this question of methodology. This is a quote. But in learning from ecologists, we must be aware of going overboard and importing into ecological economics the metaphysical assumptions that many ecologists have often inherited from their parent discipline, neo-Darwinist biology. These metaphysical assumptions of philosophical materialism and determinism are fatal to policy scientists that require the recognition of conscious purpose as causative in the world. And ecological economics is a policy science. So in our legitimate enthusiasm to learn from ecologists, we must remember our commitment to policy and resist the influence of metaphysical dogmas of determinism and materialism, whether neo-Darwinist or neo-Marxist, lest we become mere spectators in our own demise. It seems that an ecologically sustainable economy as a policy of creation care will not get far in a world dominated by materialist naturalism. But isn't that the question? Shouldn't we be able to ask the question of whether or not we are mere spectators in our own demise? Shouldn't that be a question we engage? The methodological foundations I have come to through my exploration of the agricultural revolution, economic system formation, and capitalism elevates dialectics and evolutionary materialism and appear to stand in opposition now to that adhered to by one of the key figures of ecological economics. I'm drawn to dialectics and evolutionary materialism because I found the approach to be beneficial in understanding what it is I want to understand. It's the reason that I've been drawn to dialectics and materialism and the methodology of Marx and Engels, which is all about the transformation from one economic system to another through tension and resolution. But based on the previous quote by Daly, in addition to materialist naturalism, we should avoid its expression on the economic plane, that of the neo-Marxists, whoever they are. Now, let me speak to Daly's critique of the neo-materialists and the neo-Marxists in order. Daly has explicitly disparaged what he labels as the neo-Darwinists, also referred to as at times as scientific materialists, mechanistic biologists, and materialist naturalism above other labels. And he has taken up the gauntlet against them, claiming that they maintain that everything results from random mutations subject to natural selection by differential reproductive success. He erroneously claims that the neo-Darwinist choice, and this is a quote, choice is an illusion And even if we had real options, we have no criteria for choosing among them. Natural selection does it for us, even though it may, for presumed survival reasons, delude us with the illusion of choice, unquote. Actually, evolution is much more expansive than this interpretation. Evolution is neither wholly random nor wholly deterministic. And the domain of evolution extends broadly, for example, to the evolution of human sociality, the formation of culture, and even with a bit of imagination to the formation of economic systems. More to his methodological point, Daly holds that the neo-Darwinists use evolution to sidestep their obligation to change the world because they supposedly believe all is strictly determined by processes of evolution. So what's the point of engaging action? So Daly objects to the blind purposelessness of the neo-Darwinian approach because it eliminates the interjection of objective value and human action directed by it. Acknowledging the force and process of evolution and emergence and the inherent dialectical process of the universe does not negate the possibility of choice or human intervention in the world. On the economic plane, awareness of the processes of change and the integrity and power of the economic system, informed through a dialectical and evolutionary approach, might simply make us more aware of how profound and vast our problem with limits really is. The paradox of duality between humans and Earth, and that has been with us for 10,000 years, is no easy matter to turn around. Daly believes humans are exceptional, having been created in the image and likeness of God, and that humans have the capacity for objective value, which is the thing, again, that will change the world. In his words, quote, those ecological economists less enthralled by neo-Darwinism see humans as fundamentally different, as part of the larger evolved creation, to be sure, but a special creature who, like it or not, is in charge of larger creation, because far more than any other creatures, humans reflect the image, albeit broken image, of their creator. It would seem, unquote, it would seem God creating humans in his image and likeness with the capacity for objective value has filtered into a fundamental tenet of some dominant threads of ecological economic thinking, and most importantly, frames Daly's understanding of change and the power of human agency. And if you have an interest in exploring more fully the ideas of Daly on evolution, John Gowdy and I have recently published a paper in Real World Economics Review that you can look at. For purposes here, I will say, based on Daly's words, he misunderstands the complexity and expanse of evolution and major tenets of evolution. He demonstrates an affinity for creationism, which fills the gaps he sees in evolution. And he sees humans as a different sort of creature created by God in the image and likeness of God. These appear, again, to be foundational building blocks of his thinking, and they influence his views on determinism and human agency, and his view of how and why things change. Apparently, humans have the capacity for objective value transcribed into policy that will change the material order of the human species. Clearly, I don't see the dynamic unfolding of the economic system as being adequately captured by this foundation. His rejection of mechanistic biologists, neo-Darwinists, and the rest of the monikers he uses spills over into his rejection of materialism as it is used in economic analysis, precisely because he sees deterministic and materialist elements there. I want to spend a few minutes on Marx and Engels, not because I'm a Marxist, but because I appreciate their methodology. And I do this because Daly brings them up and puts them in the same category as the neo-Darwinists. I found Marx and Engels and their materialists and evolutionary orientation quite useful in grappling with the complexity of economic systems, their formation, the process of change over time, as well as this problematic relationship between humanity's household and Earth's household. And it should be noted that Georgescu-Roegen rejected what he saw as the deterministic elements of Marx's system of the reproduction of capitalism, but he was very laudatory about his dialectic methodology. Daly removed himself from the rich body of thought that used materialism and evolutionary thinking as a foundational methodology in economics, just as he had removed his approach from the neo-Darwinists. And Daly is explicitly hostile to Marx and claims that there's been an intellectual discrediting of dialectical materialism and what he intentionally calls historical determinism. It fits into his general distaste for the neo-Darwinists and Marxists and the sin of determinism he bestows upon them. He does not elaborate on the discrediting, but let me speak to the issue. There is no question that for the most part, Georgescu-Roegen and others were correct when they put Marx in the same category as other economic paradigms in their unearthly diagrams of the economic reproduction in a capitalist system. Like other unearthly philosophers, Marx and Engels were caught up in the analysis of a paradoxical system, a system functioning according to his own laws and in some sense removed from the earth. Their framework for crisis and the demise of capitalism was not found in the problem of a limited planet and the inherent expansionary tendencies of capitalism, but in the internal mechanism of the economic system, the falling rate of profit, problem of underconsumption, class conflict, and the rest. They recognized capitalism was unique and understood that it formed out of what had come before it and it would evolve into something else. They saw the formation of movement of the system in dialectic and materials terms. They did recognize a fundamental problem between the economic system and the earth that was captured, for example, in their reference to the metabolic rift. But this was not fully integrated into their system of the reproduction of capitalism and the tensions and contradictions of that system. Okay, if you want to look at Marx's ideas and Marx's ecology, there are a number of tremendous scholars out there. John Bellamy Foster, Paul Burkett, Kohei Sato, even Jason Moore, to name a few. So how do we assess Marx and Engels? And I realize this is confusing. I think it's fair to say that their analysis of the system of capitalism helps us to understand the logic, its logic and dynamic, one side of the paradox. But they did not focus on the paradox itself, that an economic system had evolved that was of the earth, but functioned as if it was not part of the earth, okay? And they did not integrate that into their system of the reproduction of capitalism. For all that Marx and Engels didn't do, it is clear, however, that their methodology continually led them to engage foundational questions about human evolution and a more incisive understanding of this complex relationship between humans and Earth and how it takes form in economic systems. But as with all of us, their life was limited. And as evolutionary thinking and understanding of human prehistory was taking off, their lives were coming to an end. I do think it was unfinished business for them. Let me offer just a few quotes to support what I say about them. Engels noted the state of scientific discovery by the end of the 19th century and its move toward an evolutionary and dialectic view. Quote, "Thus we have once again returned to the mode of thinking of the great founders of Greek philosophy, the view that the whole of nature, has its existence in eternal coming into being and passing away, in ceaseless flux, in unresting motion and change. A view of dialectics. An example from Marx, quote, "To say that man lives from nature means that nature is his body with which he must remain a continuous interchange in order not to die. The statement that the physical and mental life of man and nature are interdependent means simply that nature is interdependent with itself, for man is part of nature," unquote. Marx said this also, quote, "History itself is a real part of natural history, of nature's coming to be man. Natural science will in time subsume under itself the science of man, just as the science of man will subsume under itself natural science. There will be one science." And this is what Marx said later after he was given The Origins of Species to read. He said, "I have read Darwin's book during the last 4 weeks. This is the book that will provide the natural history basis for our work." Now there's a call for methodological pluralism. I could go on, but what is important here to understand is that the methodology was in essence not only leading them in their understanding of capitalism and the formation of economic systems and their movement over time more generally, but toward a more foundational understanding of economic systems in relation to Earth. Both Engels and Marx focused on labor as an aspect of the evolution of humans and what it means to be human in interaction with the Earth. Not labor power sold as a commodity, but labor in the sense of interacting with Earth to serve his ends and her ends. According to Engels and Marx, all animals interact with the environment and change it, but that interaction is of a particular sort in the evolution of humans. Sado refers to the focus on labor as a mediator of humans and Earth, as the trans-historical aspect of humans and Earth. Okay? And I came to the same understanding in my work on the agricultural revolution. They understood that out of the interaction of man and Earth, there arises a social dimension to labor. And understanding, as I say, that I've come to in my own exploration. Labor is not simply an individual matter, it's a social matter. Okay, in Engels' words, the development of labor necessarily helped to bring members of society closer together by increasing cases of mutual support and joint activity. The trans-historical aspect of humans and Earth was not constant. It changed over time. Social relations underlying economic systems take on new dimensions. Sado refers to Marx's understanding of this process. He said Marx emphasized that in every stage of social development, and accordingly, the context of trans-historical metabolism between humans and nature varies significantly. Now, the problem was Marx and Engels focused almost exclusively on the form that trans-historical metabolism had taken with the presence of class society, because they had a certain pre-analytical vision in mind. They were analyzing, their focus was capitalism, okay? Where issues of class and tensions between the classes was front and center. Human prehistory and the transition from prehistory to history is not given the depth of exploration that class is given in their exploration. In other words, the dialectical and evolutionary methodology undertaken by them and its role in understanding the trans-historical metabolism between human natures was never fully developed by them. And I would say it has never subsequently been fully developed. We now have access to extensive literature and understanding of evolution, and particularly social evolution of humans and other social species. We now have extensive understanding of human prehistory and we have a more extensive understanding of the formation of material systems and awareness of seeing them in relation to Earth. So I guess I would say it seems somewhat imprudent to me to eliminate certain tools from our toolbox based on what appears to be, to me, bad science and a predisposition against materialism. It is essential that we not prematurely eliminate insights from biology and economics that might shed light on these expansive and contentious issues of determinism and human agency. The questions of determinism and human agency loom large and should be critically engaged, as should our understanding of paradox and economic change over time. But it is important to understand that things are never entirely deterministic, nor are they entirely, they are never entirely deterministic, nor is it the case that humans have no power. The truth likely lies somewhere in between. Okay? Now, I've been reading a book about the Shackleton voyage to Antarctica, and I've been moved by that book. Once Shackleton and his men embarked on that expedition, there were certain things that were clearly out of their control. And at moments during that journey, they were confronted with one hopeless situation after another, precisely because they weren't in complete control of what was happening to them, as their ship was crushed by ice floes, as ice floes broke up that they had settled on. One person who described the various expeditions of that time said of them, "When disaster strikes and all hope is gone, get down on your knees and pray for Shackleton." Shackleton didn't deny his circumstances, and in spite of it, he kept body and soul together. He understood that there were things out of his control that were not going to go in a direction, not dictated by him. And yet he found possibility, a way forward, in spite of all that was determined. And at the end of the day, he got all his men off alive. He got them all out of there alive. Unfortunately, we have no Shackleton to guide us through the waning years of this paradox. The paradox appears to us an unresolved tension, and we're having only limited success in navigating it. Back to methodology. Methodology is important in positioning our inquiries, and we should be cautious about the way we construct our foundations and what we choose to put in our toolbox and not put in our toolbox. The project Ecological Economics has set out for itself is expansive. And in my sense, it's been narrowed, perhaps inadvertently, by methodological choice and a desire to avoid determinism and elevate human agency, all in the name of avoiding hopelessness. This makes no sense to me. There are generations of people who feel hopeless. If nothing else, we are required to help them keep body and soul together in these auspicious and challenging times. It doesn't help to deny the power of the forces at play. When people can look around and see those forces in action, what is important is to help people take action with the best understanding they can have, knowing full well it might not be enough to turn things around quickly enough. Profound inequality, poverty, and instability plague us on the one hand, and ecological disaster on the other. These are unresolved tensions that mark the order of the day. They embody the tension of the paradox that has captured us. And I'll just end there.
Well, thank you. That was very thoughtful and thought-provoking. So There's a couple questions in the chat. I promised Laura that she could ask the first question if she's still on.
I am on. Thank you so much, John, and thank you so much, Lisi, for your presentation.
You're welcome.
So I think maybe my question is too basic, but I'm not familiar. It's the first time I really hear about like dialectics being a methodology, and so I'm sure I missed most of your talk just because of that piece. But if you wouldn't mind, perhaps just giving a small introduction to what that is.
Dialectics is a way of looking at the movement of the material world with an understanding that there is constant interaction and interplay in the material world. Tensions build, contradictions build, and must be resolved. So it's a kind of overarching view of the material world and the way the universe works. And in economic thinking, and in biology, I mean, it is part of evolution, the thinking on evolution, okay? That it's a complex interaction of all kinds of things that give rise to something novel, for example. In economic terms, it is it was a methodology used by Marx and Engels to try to explain the formation of capitalism and how it formed out of a previous economic system and how it would evolve into another economic system. And in their thinking, it was meant to highlight that there are objective forces and inherent dynamics that are not directly under the control of humans, okay? So humans are faced with kind of an objective reality that has developed. And so that, I think, is, I don't know if that it explains it to you very well. I think it's unfortunate, actually, that in our ecological economic programs, we don't have a foundational course in probably dialectics and evolutionary materialism that would incorporate the thinking of biologists on it and thinkers like Marx and Engels. I think that would be a great benefit to the discipline of ecological economics. Laura, did that answer your question sufficiently?
I think so. And would you say, Lisi, then that maybe an alternative or a close substitute for it would be just systems thinking, systems dynamics?
Well, I think systems dynamic is an important part of it. Yes, absolutely.
I really appreciate.
But it's also not just systems dynamic, but it is how systems develop.
Yes.
How they change, how novelty emerges. Because I do think that the agricultural revolution demonstrates to us that a novelty arose, and this novelty repositioned humans in relation to Earth, okay? And then there were forces at work over the next 10, 12 millennia that bring us to global capitalism, okay?
Thank you so much. I really appreciate it. I think I agree with you that having maybe a module that's dedicated just to these foundational ways of modeling and conceptualizing reality is very important for how to train the way we think, how we frame reality as a start.
Yeah, and also to get us to think, kind of in broader terms. We have this, human economic system in relation to Earth. That's a very complicated thing. And I do think we're presented with a paradox. I think that kind of thinking helps us to understand something about the formation of that paradox that we all
Thank you so much.
You're welcome.
Okay, next we'll have Alejandro, followed by Dick, and then whoever else.
Thanks, John. Can you listen to me?
Yes.
Can you hear me? Yeah, great. Let me just read. It was a provocative question that I just wrote on the chat for Lisi. So I wrote, as ecological economists, isn't our hope for sustainable economies rooted in a world where our actions and policies impact the ecosystem? This implies a deterministic world. Perhaps our ability to affect change relies on embracing determinism. What do you think, Lisi? That was my comment. Thanks, Lisi.
That's a really nice question, Alejandro. I do think our ability to affect change in some sense does require understanding the deterministic elements of the system, because I think it's in that broader context that we have to function. For example, I don't think there's anybody here that thinks that class antagonisms, that there's going to be an uprising of the working class that's going to overthrow capitalism. I don't think anybody thinks that. I think this is a profoundly powerful system that we've been able to manage in some ways, and it continues on, okay? think we have to recognize the power of it, and that there are deterministic elements, but within that, there are an infinite number of approaches that we can take to try to affect the system. We do not know how that will end, okay? But I do think having an idea about the deterministic force of it and not being afraid to understand that is an essential part of what we do and how we approach our circumstances. So I don't know if that answered your question, but.
Thank you, Lisi. I think it does. Thank you.
You're welcome.
Dick Norgard.
Yes, thank you, Lisi. That was brilliant. Very well done. You obviously read your lectures much better than I do.
Thank you, Dick.
No, that's a talent that I still need to learn how to develop. Yeah, there's so many things to think about that I'll be thinking for quite a while, and that's the point of it all. I'm curious why we don't just refer to modern people have these beliefs that are consistent with Herman Daly's. Herman Daly you use as an example because he resonates with your point, but the point is that we speaking broadly resonate with Herman because he speaks to something within us, and it's that within us that is the problem. And maybe that's just a way to broaden the interpretation, because now it sounds like Herman Daly led everybody astray when it was really he reflects what things that modern people believe, and that is part of the challenge too.
I think that's a really good point, Dick. I think that's a really good point, because I always feel bad when I talk about Herman in this way, like I'm, painting a bad picture of Herman. But I do think his work resonated because people want to believe that they have power, that we have agency. And I think that is a deeply ingrained part of what it is to be human. And the truth of the matter is that it's not altogether true and it's not altogether false.
Right.
But if we don't have agency, what does that mean for us?
Right.
What does it mean for us? And I guess, I have a lot of experience with this because I have a son who's been a heroin addict for 15 years. So I've had to look into what I call the black hole of darkness.
Yes.
And to understand that there are forces that are out of my control. That doesn't mean that I haven't acted, that I haven't tried in ways that I can to help him redirect his life. But it also means that I function with a recognition that, maybe it's a recognition that I am part of a universe that is broader than me, that I don't have. I mean, I do think it's kind of a, philosophical, religious, spiritual issue. And I'm glad you brought that up, because I think it's a really good point. I think it is within us to want to believe we can do something.
Yeah, I think it was especially brought out during the Enlightenment of this human agency, at least of the upper classes.
Yes. Yes, you're right. Your work has been excellent in highlighting that. I think that's true.
And so,
And I don't know how, I mean, I actually don't know how hunters and I mean, if you went back and did a study of prehistorical people in terms of their views on human agency, I don't know how that would go.
Yeah.
I'm not sure, but that's an interesting question too.
Well, again, thank you for a great talk.
Thank you, Dick. That was a great question.
You have a question by Andrew Reeves.
Hi, thank you for that talk. It was really helpful, and I think I resonated with a lot of the thoughts in it. I've been trying to incorporate some of that in my thinking as well. I guess something I've been thinking about along these lines is how our particular location, history, geography, social structure, etc., impacts our thinking and understanding of these things, whether it be economics or whatever. Even if we're using the exact same methodology. For example, in the global north, we tend to phrase our economic system as like globalized capitalism, as if it's some like homogeneous system that we're all just one big superorganism, which may be true, but it ignores, I guess, like the historical and material reality and structure of that system. So like a global south framing might be global US-led capitalist imperialism instead of a more neutral term. And so in a similar vein, there's like a great breadth of pluralism in the structure of human societies, like different agricultural societies that seem to have different dynamics. Like there are patterns, but there's also a lot of variety. Like there were collective systems emerging from peasant revolutions in Europe prior to capitalism that seem to be not growth oriented. So I was wondering if you've really dug into like a variety of agricultural civilizations and maybe, I guess, looking for a source of hope in the variety of experiments that have taken place. So like there's that mixture of agency and materialism, but with different outcomes, and that experimentation providing a source of hope, maybe.
Yeah, Andrew, thanks for that. That's a good comment and question. My work has, and this is probably a problem with it, has taken a very broad stroke. So I'm historical, but I'm historical in a way that historians would feel uncomfortable with, because historians are about detail. And I do think that there are all kinds of important things that you can understand by looking at a detailed kind of look, as you say, for example, of the peasant societies, the agricultural peasant societies in Eastern Europe, etc. I think it is, I understand what you're saying about global capitalism and how you reconceptualize that based on where you are. I can't say how important the varieties are, okay? But our movements are place-based, usually. And that means there's a particular history and a particular dynamic that might be somewhat different than the broad stroke, okay? So I think it's an important area of study, but I think it should not eclipse our understanding that there is a broad kind of change that occurred in the repositioning of us with grain agriculture that changed our relationship to the earth. And so I always like to keep that in mind. That does not mean that all of agricultural societies went in exactly the same direction. but there was a dominant kind of thread. And I think that dominant thread is what prevails now, because if you look at the extinction of language and culture, those things are being extinguished just like other species are. So
could it be maybe framed as growth-oriented systems overtaking ones that aren't growth-oriented?
Yes, I think it does. I think
Rather
it
than
does,
they
but
all
that
have
doesn't,
the same
but that
logic.
doesn't mean there's much to learn by looking in. I've always thought detailed studies of different systems are really, really important. When I was trained as a labor economist, and I started out as a labor economist, I think that's what tuned me to looking at the labor process here and labor in this dynamic. We did very detailed studies of the labor process under capitalism to find out how do, systems of inequality, how do they actually take form? What happens at the work site for that to happen. And so I think those detailed studies are really, really kind of important as we sort of, reflect, kind of find ourselves in the cask of this determinism, but trying to feel for and explore ways out. So that's the best answer I have for you.
Rigo has a question if he's still on.
Hi, Lizzie.
Hey,
Nice to meet
Rigo.
you. Yeah, I was just wondering, we've talked a little bit about this before, but that lack of more, dialectics or materialism and so many other methods from the heterodox schools, sometimes missing ecological economics, not completely, obviously there's many people doing different things, but that might be due to the fact that, classical economics has this hegemony that has existed, right, in which its methods are considered objective. So whomever is reviewing articles, whomever is in charge of all this stuff, probably wouldn't accept these other methods from the heterodox schools. I wonder what do you think about the need for being more critical with methodological pluralism to make sure that we can bring in more of the diversity of methods to address the root causes of our complexity and the problems that it's driving?
Well, I think it's essential. And I think, that was part of my point. Let's not eliminate anything. And there is something to the hegemony of neoclassical economics. But the thing that, the Marxian framework of economic reproduction and the neoclassical model have in common is that they're both really trying to describe a system in very different ways. That is part of this paradox. And so we have a really complicated landscape on our hands. We have these different ways of describing one side of the paradox, that is how these systems function. And then we have the challenge of actually engaging the paradox itself. How does a system form and develop that is a material system? And you and I have talked about this. It's a material system, but it has an internal logic that acts in a sense as if it isn't, or not fully. And so I think we have a really complicated kind of landscape as ecological economists to confront. And we can't afford to eliminate certain tools from our toolbox, nor can we alienate different ways of looking at things. We have to open a conversation. And so I think it's important. I mean, there's no question about the dominance of neoclassical economics and just the dominance of the kind of power of the benefit and power of capitalism without more critically looking at it. And so we don't want to have, but here we are in 2024. With a debate among presidential candidates where Donald Trump is, calling Kamala Harris a Marxist, for God's sakes. I mean, can't we somehow get beyond that and engage the multitude of ideas that we have to engage here to confront. That's what I think ecological economics needs to do. Really engage the complexity of it, fully engage the complexity. I don't know if that answered your question, Rico.
Well, there's no more time, but just thank you so much for everything, and I'll see you soon.
Okay, all right.
Is there anybody else that would like to ask a question or comment? John, go ahead. You gotta unmute yourself.
Unmute.
There you
How's
go.
that?
I scream unmute.
Is that okay? Can people hear me?
Yes.
Yeah.
Yeah, I just had a comment on sort of methodological pluralism, this whole discussion, but I was a student of economics in the late 1970s. Okay, sure. I also had the fortune to take courses from Krzyzewski Rosen, had a lot of interaction with him. But it seemed then there were gas lines, there were wars in the Middle East, and signs of scarcity all over the place. It really looked like, we were on the verge of some, maybe not collapse, but major changes. I mean, who would have believed that 50 years later, the world would be seemingly awash in oil? I think the U.S. is now the greatest producer of fossil fuels. Okay, one reason for that, I think, the reaction to Ceausescu and others from the standard economists was substitution and a technological change will solve everything, so there's nothing to worry about. So I think it led a lot of us to sort of downplay the power of the system in substituting, finding alternatives, and so on. So there's a real danger when you have such a reaction to something that opposes your views, just to sort of throw the whole thing out. I think thinking back, I was guilty of this too, but we should have taken the criticisms more seriously. So,
Thanks, John. Yeah.
yeah.
There's a couple comments in the chat. Is there a way that people could reach out to you? They have questions and may want to communicate with you. So is there an appropriate way for them to do that?
Yes, they can email me. And I don't know whether you have the capacity to send out my email, but I'm fine to have people have my email.
Okay.
I would love to converse with people about the questions that they have, because of course, as I said from the beginning, this is a work in progress. And I benefit greatly from the questions that I get.
So I'll send everybody who registered an email with your email address. So
hopefully it won't be a disaster.
be prepared. And Satya's got a question. I thought.
She's there.
Did we lose Satya? I think she'll probably email you.
Okay.
Junior Garcia, if he's still on. Nope. Okay. And I think that's about it. So I will send out the email address to everybody and they can contact you. Before I finalize things, do you have any last comments you'd like to make?
No, except I think there's let's not get caught up with the hopelessness. Just try to discern the best way we can a way forward, in small ways, in big ways. I've been involved in a fight in the greater Yellowstone ecosystem, where I have a cabin against the development of a huge 250,000 square foot lodge for wealthy tourists along a wild river called the Hoback River. And actually, after 5 years, we were successful in stopping it. Now, I won't say that's going to change the world, but it changed something. So,
Well, first of all, thank you very much. A very thoughtful and excellent presentation. I just want to remind everybody, next week we will have another seminar by Lina Brand Correa from York University. And then from there, we really have a lot. So please stay engaged with us. We have a lot going on. We've already got stuff finalized into February of next year. So keep in contact with us. You should all be getting information from us, but please stay engaged. And I think along with Lisi's talk today, ecological economics, I think by definition is a big tent group. And when we silo ourselves into these different sections, it doesn't do anybody any good. And we really need to engage with each other, regardless if we agree with a type of philosophy or not. We both benefit from those arguments and those discussions. And I think as a field, we need to get back to that and be the transdisciplinary field that we're supposed to be and be the big tent field that we are supposed to be in order to actually solve the problems, whether we can or not, to give people hope. And with that, I mean, Lisi, we can't thank you enough for the great talk, and thank everybody for attending today.
and can I just say one more thing?
Sure.
I mean, I know that what I said is very critical in some ways of Herman Daly, but I want people to understand that Herman Daly and his work actually changed the course of my life. It brought me into the ecological economic fold and into this thinking about the problem of limits. And so I can critique him and at the same time acknowledge that he was a profound force in my life and my thinking. And I was a radical economist, but I can tell you at the time that in the early 90s, the radical economists were not talking much about limits. So I'll end there.
That's a great way to end. So thank you, everybody. And thank you again, Lisi, for the great talk. So
Thanks for the invite, John.
bye, everybody.